Like and subscribe if you think history is just a dusty old book filled with boring dates. Spoiler alert, it's not. Today, we're diving into the bizarre and downright grotesque world of medieval oddities that will make you question everything you thought you knew about humanity. Ever heard of trial by ordeal? Imagine being thrown into a river to see if you float, because if you do, you must be a witch. Or how about the infamous dancing plague of 1518, where hundreds of people just couldn't stop dancing until they collapsed? Sounds like a wild party, right? But trust me, it wasn't all fun and games. Now, let's talk punishments. Did you know that in ancient Rome, some criminals were sentenced to be sewn into the skins of wild animals? Talk about a dramatic wardrobe malfunction. And if you thought your family gatherings were awkward, consider the medieval practice of marriage by capture, because nothing says romance like a good old-fashioned kidnapping. And speaking of disasters, remember the Great Fire of London in 1666. It was a fiery catastrophe that left thousands homeless, but on the bright side, at least it took out the plague-infested rats roaming the streets. What about bizarre sexual curiosities? Did you know that ancient Greeks believed a woman's fertility was directly linked to the moon? So, if you were having trouble conceiving, just blame it on bad lunar alignment. So, are you ready for a journey through time that's as shocking as it is strangely fascinating? Stick around for jaw-dropping facts, specific dates, and a few more oddities that might just keep you up at night. Let's unravel the peculiar tapestry of humanity's past, because who needs sleep when you can have stories like these? Ah, the Viking Age. A time of rapacious raiding, seafaring conquests, and, surprisingly, an obsession with helmet aesthetics. Yes, dear readers, let us delve into the tediously fascinating history of Viking helmet feathers and the standardized fluff regulations that governed them. Fasten your helmets, for the journey through time will be both enlightening and absurd. ####Chapter 1, The Dawn of the Feather. Circa 793 AD, Lindisfarne, England. The Viking Age kicked off with the famous raid on Lindisfarne, but what many fail to consider is the fashion statement that came with it. You see, while Viking warriors were busy pillaging monasteries for gold, they were also engaged in a quiet competition over who could sport the flashiest helmet. The earliest records suggest that feathers were first used as a form of intimidation, because nothing says, "Fear me," like a plume of ostrich feathers bobbing atop a horned helmet. But wait! Did they actually wear horned helmets? The short answer, probably not. The long answer, who cares? The image of a fearsome warrior sporting a feathered crown is too delightful to dismiss. ###Chapter 2, The Feather Flap of 850 AD. 850 AD, The Great Feather Debate. By 850 AD, Viking warriors were beginning to embrace the art of decoration with a passion typically reserved for overly ambitious DIY projects. Enter the Great Feather Debate, a heated discussion that raged across the fjords from Norway to the British Isles. On one side were the feather fanatics, who believed that the more feathers you sported, the more formidable you appeared in battle. They argued, if a bird can fly with feathers, Why can't we strike fear in our enemies? On the other side were the minimalists, who insisted that too many feathers would cause a serious aerodynamic issue during raids. One particularly bold minimalist, a warrior named Bjorn the Unfeathered, famously declared, "I do not need fluff to show my worth, my axe is my plumage." With no resolution in sight, this debate led to the first recorded instance of a Viking duel. The two sides met on a snowy field in Norway, and instead of axes, they brought their helmets adorned with feathers. The result? A chaotic mess of feathers flying everywhere and two very confused goats who wandered into the fray. Chapter 3, The Standardization of Fluff. Circa 900 AD, the Fluff Protocols. By 900 AD, the feather frenzy had escalated to such an extent that a council of Viking chieftains convened in what is now Oslo. They realized that the sheer variance in feather length and fluffiness was leading to confusion on the battlefield. After all, how could you tell if that imposing figure was a friend or foe when everyone looked like a peacock gone rogue? Thus, the Fluff Protocols were enacted. These regulations specified that 1. Feather length. No feather should exceed 12 inches in length. This prompted countless debates over whether to use the inch or the metric system. Spoiler, they stuck with inches because it sounded more manly. 2. Feather type. Only the feathers of specific birds were allowed. The official list included peacocks, ostriches, and, remarkably, the common barn owl, because who doesn't want to channel their inner nocturnal predator? 3. Fluff density. Each helmet must have a minimum fluff density of 25%. This was measured using an elaborate system involving scales, which mysteriously went missing after one particularly raucous feast. 4. Color restrictions. Bright neon colors were banned, as they were deemed too flashy for the Viking aesthetic. Instead, earthy tones like brown, gray, and the ever-popular blood red were the order of the day. Chapter 4, The Great Fluff Scandal of 950 AD. 950 AD, Uppsala, Sweden. The Fluff Protocols, however, were not without their controversies. Enter Thora, the Fluff Master, a savvy helmet maker who discovered a loophole in the regulations. Thora began importing exotic feathers from distant lands, specifically, a type of flamboyant tropical bird known as the macaw. Her helmets were all the rage, causing a flurry of jealousy among Viking warriors who still adhered to the protocols. The scandal reached its peak during the annual raid on the British Isles, when Thora's helmets became the talk of the battlefield. One warrior, dressed in a standard-issue helmet, scoffed at Thora's creation, saying, "What good are those feathers when you can't even swing an axe?" Thora simply replied, "I can swing an axe and look fabulous doing it." In a shocking twist, Thora's helmets became so popular that warriors began to forsake their traditional regalia in favor of her flamboyant designs. To counter this, the council enacted the Anti-Fluff Act of 951 AD, which mandated that any warrior caught wearing non-standard feathers would face a fine of 50 silver coins, an astronomical sum at the time. Chapter 5, The Feather Wars of 980 AD. 980 AD, the Battle of the Feathers. As you might expect, the Anti-Fluff Act did not sit well with the feather fanatics. Tensions reached a boiling point, and in what became known as the Feather Wars, warriors divided themselves into factions based on their helmet adornments. The battles were absurdly comical by modern standards. Warriors would charge into battle, but instead of swords clashing, it was feathers flying. The most memorable incident involved a group of warriors who, during a heated skirmish, accidentally collided and became entangled in each other's plumes. It took an entire afternoon for the town's children to untangle the mess, all while giggling at the sight of grizzled warriors looking like an avian version of a fashion show gone awry. The Feather Wars concluded with a peace treaty signed in 985 AD, where both sides agreed that while fluff was important, it should never overshadow a warrior's true prowess. They also established the Feather Council, which would oversee all matters related to helmet decoration, a bureaucratic nightmare if ever there was one. Chapter 6, The Decline of the Feather. Circa 1000 AD, the rise of function over fashion. As the Viking Age waned, so too did the era of extravagant helmet feathers. The introduction of more practical armor and the rise of the medieval knight led to a decline in feather usage. Helmets transformed from flamboyant fashion statements into utilitarian pieces designed for battle effectiveness. It was around this time that one particularly astute warrior, Eirik, the Practical, famously stated, "I'd rather have my head intact than a colorful plume." His pragmatic approach resonated with many, leading to a cultural shift that prioritized survival over style. While the feathers faded from the battlefield, they remained a cherished part of Viking lore, with tales of the Feather Wars passed down through generations. Chapter 7, Legacy of the Fluff. Circa 1100 AD, the feathers live on. By 1100 AD, the Viking Age had effectively come to a close, but the legacy of helmet feathers lived on in the hearts of many. The Feather Council evolved into a guild dedicated to preserving the history of Viking fashion, and in 1105 AD, they hosted the first annual Fluff Fest, an event that celebrated all things fluffy. The festival featured competitions, including Best Feathered Helmet and Most Creative Use of Fluff, complete with judges who wore powdered wigs and capes for added flair. The event was a raucous affair, with plenty of mead and laughter, and it became a tradition that would last for centuries. Conclusion, the absurdity of history. So, as we wrap up this energetic, witty narration of the tedious history of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations, one has to wonder, were the Vikings truly fearsome warriors, or just a bunch of fashion-forward feather enthusiasts? Perhaps it was a bit of both. In any case, the legacy of their eccentric obsession lives on, reminding us that history is often a tapestry woven with the threads of absurdity, competition, and a touch of flair. And let us not forget the timeless lesson, when in doubt, always choose the helmet with the most feathers. The tedious history of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations. Introduction, a feathered conundrum. The Viking Age, 793, 1066 AD, is often romanticized as a time of heroic seafarers, fierce battles, and exceptional craftsmanship. However, lurking beneath this facade of valor lies a perplexing issue that has seldom received its due attention: the regulation of helmet feathers. Yes, those flamboyant plumes that adorned the helmets of our Nordic warriors were not merely for show, they were the subject of rigorous construction methods, bureaucratic oversight, and elaborate inventories. So, grab your horned helmet, sans feathers, please, as we delve into the tedious yet fascinating history of Viking helmet feathers and the intricate fluff regulations that govern them. ##### Construction methods and materials. The first step in the feathered helmet saga begins with the construction methods and materials. Contrary to popular belief, Viking helmets were primarily made from iron, bronze, or hardened leather. However, the decorative elements were where things got truly complex. 1. Materials used, circa 850 AD. Iron or bronze, the core material for durability. Leather, for inner linings and comfort. Feathers, the piece de resistance, typically sourced from local birds, geese, swans, and even crows were fair game. Dyes and tannins, used to color the feathers, often derived from plants or minerals. 2. Construction techniques. Forging. Iron helmets were hammered into shape using techniques passed down through generations. Plumage attachment. Feathers were securely attached using leather straps or metal fasteners. Finishing touches. Craftsmen would apply natural sealants, think fish oil, to protect the feathers from the elements, because nothing says intimidating Norse warrior like a bedraggled plume. The costs of these elaborate helmets were substantial, often taking the equivalent of several sheep's worth of silver to complete. It's a wonder that the Vikings didn't start a side hustle in the helmet business. ##### Bureaucratic rules and punishments. As the Viking Age progressed, so did the need for regulation. By the late 10th century, a network of local chieftains and regional leaders took it upon themselves to define the standards for helmet adornments. 1. Standardized fluff regulations, circa 975 AD. Feather length. All feathers must not exceed 12 inches in length to maintain a uniform appearance. Color codes. Specific colors were assigned to different clans. For instance, blue feathers indicated allegiance to the House of Bjorn, while red was reserved for the House of Skuld. Talk about a fashion faux pas. Feather count. Helmets were required to have a minimum of 3 feathers. Anything less was considered undignified. 2. Punishments for non-compliance. Fines. Offenders faced hefty fines, often in livestock or silver. Public shaming. A helmet with insufficient fluff could result in the wearer being paraded through the village, feathers askew, a fate worse than Valhalla for many a warrior. Banishment. Chronic offenders could find themselves exiled to a remote island, an eternity of solitude with nothing but poorly adorned helmets for company. #### Roles and job descriptions. The feathered helmet phenomenon required a plethora of specialized roles, each with its own unique job description. 1. Helmet smith. Responsibilities: crafting the iron or bronze base of the helmet, ensuring it met local regulations. Skills required: metalworking expertise, design knowledge, and an uncanny ability to avoid accidentally forging a frying pan instead of a helmet. 2. Feather artisan. Responsibilities: sourcing, dyeing, and preparing feathers for attachment to helmets. Skills required: ornithology basics, dyeing techniques, and the ability to negotiate with local bird populations, who often had their own ideas about which feathers should be used. 3. Regulatory overseer. Responsibilities: enforcing the standardized fluff regulations and conducting inspections. Skills required: bureaucratic savvy, a keen eye for detail, and a penchant for wielding a measuring tape like a sword. 4. Feather inspector. Responsibilities: inspecting helmets for compliance with fluff regulations. Skills required: a discerning eye for feather quality and the ability to resist the urge to ruffle feathers, pun intended. Hashtag technical specs and inventories. By the early 11th century, detailed inventories began to emerge, cataloging the types of helmets and their respective feather configurations. These records were crucial for maintaining order and preventing the chaos that could ensue from poorly adorned helmets. 1. Sample inventory, circa 1000 AD. Helmet type: winged iron helmets. Feather count: 6. Color: blue and black. Owner: Bjorn the Bold. Helmet type: leather helmets. Feather count: 4. Color: red. Owner: Ingrid the Intrepid. Helmet type: decorative bronze helmets. Feather count: 8. Color: rainbow, not an official color code, but who could resist? Owner: Loki the Trickster. 2. Technical specifications. Weight: a fully adorned helmet typically weighed between 3 to 5 pounds, depending on the materials used. Feather durability: feathers were expected to withstand at least 3 major battles before needing replacement, an ambitious standard considering the Viking penchant for chaos. The decline of fluff regulations. By the end of the Viking Age, as Christianity spread and Viking culture began to assimilate into other European traditions, the stringent regulations surrounding helmet feathers fell by the wayside. The rise of more practical armor designs made the flamboyant plumes obsolete. Ironically, the very regulations that had once caused so much bureaucratic strife were now forgotten, leaving behind only whispers of a time when warriors were judged not just by their skill in battle, but by the splendor of their headgear. In a rather humorous twist of fate, historians have noted that the last recorded instance of an official feather inspection occurred in 1065 AD, when a local chieftain was found guilty of wearing a helmet with excessive fluff. His punishment? A lifetime of wearing a plain, unadorned helmet, truly a fate worse than death for a Viking warrior. Conclusion, a fluffy legacy. The history of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations is a testament to the intricate societal frameworks that governed even the most mundane aspects of life during the Viking Age. From the meticulous crafting of helmets to the bureaucratic oversight of feather regulations, these seemingly trivial details remind us that even the fiercest warriors had to contend with the absurdities of life. So, the next time you put on a helmet, or perhaps just a winter hat, spare a thought for those intrepid Viking warriors and their feathered finery. After all, in the grand tapestry of history, it's often the smallest threads that tell the most colorful stories. The tedious history of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations. Ah, the Viking Age. A time of fierce warriors, epic sagas, and, believe it or not, a surprisingly intricate bureaucracy surrounding the adornment of helmets with feathers. It's a tale filled with construction methods, regulatory red tape, and a series of baffling job descriptions that would make any modern-day civil servant blush. So grab your horned helmet, though it's likely not historically accurate, and let's dive into the delightful minutiae of Viking helmet feathers and their fluff regulations. ####Construction methods and materials, 800-1000 AD. Viking helmets, often misconceived as the iconic horn versions thanks to modern pop culture, were primarily crafted from iron or steel. The standard model, known as the Viking Spangenhelm, was constructed using a series of metal segments riveted together. Think of it as the IKEA approach to headgear but without the helpful instructions. Key materials *. 1. Iron/steel *. The primary material for helmet bases, sourced from local smithies. Iron was often recycled from older weapons and tools. 2. Feather *. The crowning glory of any Viking helm, feathers were mostly sourced from local birds, primarily geese and swans, selected for their size and fluffiness. 3. Leather * used for the interior lining to make the helmet more comfortable and to absorb sweat, a crucial factor in the damp Nordic climate. Cost breakdown *. Base helmet construction * 5 silver pieces, approximate 125 grams of silver. Feather acquisition * 1 silver piece per dozen feathers, that's a steal for the fluffiness. Labor costs * 2 silver pieces for a skilled smith to assemble and embellish. ### Bureaucratic rules and punishments, circa 950 AD. With the rise of Viking settlements, so too came the necessity for order, especially when it came to the noble art of helmet fluffing. Enter the Fluff Council of Skandinavisk Rig, responsible for the establishment of standardized fluff regulations. Key regulations * 1. Fluff Quality Standard, FQS. All feathers must be a minimum of 12 inches in length and possess an optimal fluffiness ratio, OFR, of at least 75%. This was determined through rigorous squish tests. 2. Color codes * helmets were required to have feathers dyed in approved colors, natural tones like white, black, or shades of brown. No neon greens or pinks allowed, this was a matter of honor. 3. Feather permits * any Viking wishing to adorn their helmet with feathers had to apply for a permit, detailing the source and fluffiness of the feathers. Failure to comply could lead to serious repercussions. Punishments for non-compliance *. First offense * a public reprimand, complete with a feathered hat worn in mockery. Second offense * mandatory participation in a Fluff re-education camp, where offenders would learn proper feather care and maintenance. Third offense * banishment from all helmet-related activities, including but not limited to, helmet parades and fluff competitions. ##### roles and job descriptions, circa 960 AD. The rise of the Fluff Council necessitated a variety of roles. Each position was instrumental in ensuring that the Fluff regulations were adhered to and that Viking warriors could strut their stuff with pride. 1. Feather Inspector * tasked with enforcing the Fluff quality standard, inspectors would travel from village to village, armed with a fluffometer, a device that measured fluffiness, of course. Required skills * a keen eye for detail and a nose for sniffing out subpar feathers. 2. Helmet Smith * the backbone of this operation, these craftsmen were responsible for creating and customizing helmets. They often doubled as fluff consultants, helping warriors choose the right feather arrangements. Required skills * metalworking, creativity, and a steady hand, which is essential when hammering out the details of a masterpiece. 3. Fluff Bureaucrat * a position filled by the most ambitious of the lot. These individuals navigated the labyrinthine regulations and ensured that everything was above board. Required skills * a penchant for paperwork and the ability to recite the Fluff regulations verbatim, bonus points for doing so while juggling feathers. 4. Fluff Facilitator * this role involved overseeing the distribution of feathers from local sources to helmet makers, ensuring that all feathers met the council's standards. Required skills * excellent organizational skills and a knack for negotiation, essential when dealing with local bird farmers. ##### Technical specs and inventories, 970–1000 AD. With the bureaucratic machine in full swing, let's take a closer look at some of the technical specifications and inventories that became the backbone of Viking helmet feather regulations. Helmet specifications *. Weight * average weight of a fully adorned helmet was 1.5 kilograms, 3.3 pounds, feather inclusive. Dimensions * standard diameter of the helmet rim was 30 centimeters, 11.8 inches, accommodating an array of feather arrangements. Feather density * each helmet was allowed a maximum of 25 feathers at any given time, ensuring that no helm was overly weighed down or excessively flamboyant. Inventory checklist * 1. Base helmets * minimum stock of 50 per smithy. 2. Feathers * each local council required at least 1,000 feathers in varying colors, categorized by fluffiness. 3. Dyes and tanning agents * a complete inventory of natural dyes, berry-based, plant-based, to ensure compliance with color regulations. #### The Feather Wars, a comedy of errors. In the late 990s, tensions reached a boiling point. Various Viking factions began to argue over the correct type of feathers to be used. Some swore by the fluffiness of geese, while others claimed swan feathers were the only way to go. The Great Feather Wars erupted, leading to ridiculous skirmishes involving feather tossing and heated debates over the merits of different feather lengths. In one notable incident, a Viking leader was doused in a bucket of dyed feathers as a form of protest, leading to the infamous phrase, "Don't be a peacock, stay grounded." Conclusion, the legacy of feathery regulations. By the turn of the millennium, the Fluff Council had solidified its position within Viking culture. While the helmet regulations may seem trivial compared to the epic sagas of conquest and exploration, they reflect a unique aspect of Viking society, the blend of warrior ethos with an appreciation for aesthetics. The ultimate irony. As the Viking Age transitioned into the medieval era, the very feathers that once adorned helmets became relics of the past. The rigorous Fluff regulations faded away, leaving behind only tales of bureaucratic absurdity. So the next time you see a Viking helmet, remember, it's not just a piece of metal, but a symbol of a society that took its fluff very seriously. And if you happen to be in the presence of a particularly pompous helmet, feel free to give a knowing nod. It likely has a storied history of fluff regulation behind it. In the end, the saga of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations teaches us one enduring lesson: even the fiercest of warriors had to navigate the delicate art of headgear embellishment, and sometimes, a little feather can go a long way in making a statement, both in battle and in bureaucracy. The tedious history of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations. The Viking Age, 793–1066 AD, is often romanticized as an era of fierce warriors, bold explorations, and the occasional dragon slaying. Yet, beneath the surface of this rugged mythology lies a world governed by the minutiae of daily life, including the surprisingly intricate business of helmet adornment. Yes, we're talking about the feathers that crown these iconic headpieces and the standardized regulations that dictated their use. Let's delve into the feathered fray that was the Viking helmet fluff saga, a tale filled with construction methods, bureaucratic rules, job roles, and all the delightful details that make history anything but dull. Construction methods and materials. Viking helmets, renowned for their formidable designs, were typically constructed from iron, leather, or a combination of both. The earliest helmets, like the Germanbu helmet, circa 950 AD, were simple but effective. These helmets, however, were often adorned with feathers, both to signify status and to ensure that the wearer was the center of attention, even amidst the chaos of battle. Materials used *. 1. Iron *. The primary material used for the helmet structure, often sourced from bog iron. 2. Leather *. Commonly used as an interior lining to offer comfort and a snug fit. 3. Feathers *. Sourced primarily from local birds, with swan and raven feathers being the most popular. Exotic feathers from afar were sometimes acquired through trade. Construction costs *. The cost of creating a helmet was not insubstantial. A well-crafted helmet could cost anywhere from 10 to 20 silver coins, equivalent to several months' wages for a skilled craftsman. The addition of feathers, however, could elevate the price dramatically, especially if one sought the rare blue and gold plumage from distant lands. Feather application was an artisanal practice, involving both sewing and gluing, which required not just skill but also a keen eye for aesthetics. Hashtag bureaucratic rules and punishments. As with many aspects of Viking life, the adornment of helmets was not without its regulations. The Althing, the early Icelandic parliament, established rules concerning the use of feathers that were both amusing and strict. Key regulations *. 1. Fluff quality standards * feathers had to meet specific fluffiness criteria, which were determined by a committee of craftspeople and warriors. If a feather was deemed too limp or bedraggled, it could not be used. 2. Color codes * specific colors were reserved for certain ranks. For instance, a chieftain might flaunt vibrant red feathers, while a common warrior would be limited to shades of gray or brown. 3. Attachment protocols * feathers had to be affixed using approved methods, which included sewing, gluing, or a combination of both. Punishments *. Violators of these regulations faced a series of amusingly severe penalties. The first offense might result in a public rebuke, the second could lead to a fine of up to 5 sheep, the Viking currency of embarrassment, evidently. A third offense? Exile to the dreaded dunghill of disgrace, where one had to wear a helmet adorned with the most unattractive feathers imaginable. Think the disgraced warrior wearing feathers from the local goose. Hashtag roles and job descriptions. In the world of Viking helmet fluff, various roles emerged, each with its distinct responsibilities, often leading to some rather unexpected career paths. 1. The feather collector ***. Responsibilities * scouring the countryside and coastlines for the freshest and most vibrant feathers. Often accompanied by a gaggle of geese, as they were known to have a knack for locating the best plumes. Skills required ** a keen eye for color and texture, as well as the ability to negotiate with local birds. 2. The helmet smith ***. Responsibilities ** crafting the iron and leather portions of the helmet, ensuring that the structure was both protective and aesthetically pleasing. Skills required ** mastery of metallurgy and an understanding of aerodynamics. After all, a feathered helmet is only as good as its ability to fly through the air during combat. 3. The fluff artisan ***. Responsibilities ** affixing feathers to helmets according to the latest regulations, ensuring that each helmet met the fluffiness and color standards set forth by the Althing. Skills required ** exceptional sewing skills and an eye for artistic detail. Some fluff artisans went on to become highly regarded in the art community, leading to a burgeoning market for feathered accessories. Hashtag technical specs and inventories. The Viking obsession with helmet fluff led to detailed inventories, especially in larger settlements where helmets were a staple of both commerce and warfare. A standard inventory list might include iron plates * 3 to 5 sheets, 3 mm thick. Leather linings * 1 large piece, tanned and dyed. Feather stock * 50 swan feathers, white. 30 raven feathers, black. 20 exotic feathers, blue and gold. Adhesives * 1 jar of traditional Viking glue, made from boiled animal skins. 1 spool of linen thread. Each inventory was meticulously recorded, with a focus on maintaining quality control. The Viking equivalent of a quality assurance department was often a group of experienced warriors who would sample the fluffiness of feathers before approving a shipment for use. ### The feather debate, a comedic interlude. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the absurdity of the feather debate that ensued among Viking communities. Picture, if you will, a serious council of warriors discussing the merits of swan versus raven feathers. Ravens are cunning, one warrior would proclaim. They symbolize wisdom and strategy. To what end? Another would counter. I want my helmet to scream, fierce warrior, not cawing nuisance. This debate could stretch long into the night, often fueled by mead and the occasional bit of feathered drama. It's said that one particularly heated discussion resulted in a temporary ban on all feather-related conversations, a rare moment of Viking consensus on the necessity of focus during war. ### The decline of feather regulations. By the late 11th century, as the Viking Age transitioned into the medieval period, the fervor surrounding helmet feathers began to dwindle. The rise of chain mail and more standardized combat gear meant that the flamboyant helmets of yore were no longer practical. Final regulations *. By 1066, the last significant regulation regarding helmet feathers was passed, stipulating that all helmets in battle should be devoid of any non-functional ornamentation. Henceforth, warriors would focus more on protection than on plume, leading to a somber, yet practical aesthetic. ### Conclusion. The history of Viking helmet feathers may seem trivial when placed alongside their grand tales of exploration and conquest. Yet, it is a remarkable reflection of the values and intricacies of their society. From construction methods grounded in metallurgy and artistry to the bureaucratic regulations that govern feather fluffiness, one can't help but admire the commitment to both beauty and function. So, the next time you find yourself donning a helmet, be it for a Renaissance fair or a particularly intense game of medieval-themed paintball, remember the Viking legacy of helmet fluff. Because, if nothing else, they taught us that a bit of flair can go a long way, even in the most serious of endeavors. And who knows? Maybe the next great warrior will emerge, sporting a feathered crown, ready to conquer both hearts and battlefields alike. ### The tedious history of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations. The Viking Age, spanning from approximately 793 to 1066 AD, was marked not only by exploration and conquest but also by a peculiar obsession with sartorial splendor, specifically, the use of feathers in helmet adornments. This practice, however, was not merely a matter of aesthetic flair, it necessitated a complex web of construction methods, bureaucratic oversight, and social hierarchies. The story of Viking helmet feathers is a riveting saga filled with regulations that were, quite frankly, as fluffy as the feathers themselves. ### Construction methods and materials. Viking helmets were primarily constructed from iron, with some variants using leather or, in rare instances, bronze. The use of feathers, however, took the craftsmanship to another level. Viking artisans would source feathers from various birds, primarily swans, geese, and ravens. The feathers were cleaned, dyed, often in vibrant colors, and treated to withstand the harsh Scandinavian climate. 1. Cleaning. Feathers were soaked in a solution of vinegar and salt water to remove any residual oils and impurities. 2. Dyeing. Natural dyes derived from plants like madder root or woad were used to achieve shades of red or blue, while the more elusive black was often derived from soot. 3. Treatment. A combination of beeswax and linseed oil was applied to protect the feathers, giving them both a shine and a level of water resistance. By the late 9th century, the costs associated with these materials began to escalate. A single helmet adorned with feathers could cost upwards of 4 silver coins, a princely sum when the average Viking raider earned about 1 silver coin for a day of pillaging. The price of feathers fluctuated, of course, influenced by supply and demand. One could argue that feather prices were as volatile as the Norse weather itself. ##### bureaucratic rules and punishments. With the increasing popularity of feathered helmets came the need for regulation. The Council of the Elders in various Viking settlements established a set of rules governing the use of feathers in helmet construction. These regulations were meticulously documented on rune stones and scrolls, leading to a veritable paper trail of bureaucratic nonsense. 1. Standardization. By 900 AD, it was decreed that all helmet feathers must be of a specific length, between 20 and 25 centimeters, and width, no more than 5 centimeters. This was to ensure uniformity across all Viking helmets. 2. Quality control. A guild of feather inspectors was formed in 910 AD, tasked with inspecting helmets for compliance with these regulations. Any helmet found with substandard feathers would be confiscated and burned, an unfortunate fate for any helmet that had seen the battlefield. 3. Punishments. Violators of the feather regulations faced hefty fines, up to 3 silver coins, or, in egregious cases, a public shaming where the offender's helmet was worn backward for a fortnight. This practice was not merely punitive, it served as a cautionary tale against the perils of noncompliance. #### roles and job descriptions. The world of Viking helmet feathers was supported by a variety of roles, each with its own set of responsibilities. 1. Feather gatherers. Tasked with sourcing feathers, these individuals often roamed the countryside and coastal areas. Their job required a keen eye and a willingness to brave the elements. A feather gatherer could expect to collect around 100 feathers a week, assuming they weren't chased off by angry geese. 2. Artisans, skilled craftsmen who designed and constructed the helmets. They typically trained for several years as apprentices, learning the intricacies of metalwork and feather application. An artisan could produce one helmet every 2 weeks, depending on the complexity of the feather arrangement. 3. Inspectors. The feather inspectors, often former artisans themselves, were the gatekeepers of quality. Their role was not only to check for compliance but also to educate craftsmen on the latest standards. They were known for their meticulous attention to detail, which often bordered on obsession. 4. The guild master. At the top of this hierarchy was the guild master, who oversaw all operations. This individual was responsible for maintaining relationships with local leaders and ensuring that the guild's interests were represented in council meetings. If you think running a guild was a featherweight task, think again. ###### technical specs and inventories. As the demand for feathered helmets grew, so too did the need for precise technical specifications. By 950 AD, a comprehensive inventory system was established to track feather types, colors, and quantities. Specifications. Material composition. Helmets must consist of at least 85% metal and 15% feathers. Feather types. Only swan, goose, and raven feathers were approved. Any use of peacock feathers was strictly forbidden due to their association with vanity and pride, qualities that Vikings tended to frown upon. Weight limit. A fully adorned helmet could not exceed 3.5 kilograms. The rationale was simple. Any helmet too heavy could hinder a warrior's ability to engage in quick maneuvers, especially when attempting to avoid a rogue axe. Inventory lists. 500 swan feathers from the Lake of Mjolnir, resolved to be the best quality. 300 goose feathers from the northern fjords, known for their durability. 200 raven feathers sourced from the forests of the Midgard region, often used for ceremonial helmets. ########The rise of the feather wars. As the 10th century progressed, the competition among settlements to produce the most extravagant helmets led to what historians have dubbed the Feather Wars. This period was characterized by rivalries that escalated into full-blown skirmishes over feather rights. Settlements began hoarding feathers, leading to shortages and inflated prices. In a particularly notorious incident in 965 AD, the settlement of Yggdrasil attempted to raid the feather reserves of neighboring Valhalla, sparking a conflict that resulted in the famous Battle of the Fluffy Helmets. This battle, while not particularly bloody, was marked by an overwhelming amount of fluff and feathers flying through the air, leading many to question the practicality of their headgear. Conclusion: the legacy of Viking helmet feathers. By the dawn of the 11th century, the obsession with feathered helmets began to wane, as practical designs took precedence in the face of evolving warfare. The last known reference to standardized fluff regulations appeared in a council scroll dated 1035 AD, marking the end of an era. Yet, the legacy of Viking helmet feathers endures. They serve as a testament to the complex interplay of art, regulation, and social structure in Viking society. Today, modern reenactors and historians continue to explore this fascinating aspect of Viking culture, often with a chuckle over the absurdities of a time when fluffiness was a matter of life and death. In retrospect, who knew that such a seemingly trivial detail, feathers on helmets, could lead to bureaucratic quagmires, social upheaval, and even the occasional goose chase? After all, in the world of Vikings, it seems, it was not just about the strength of your sword but also the fluffiness of your helmet. The tedious history of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations. Ah, the Vikings! Those burly marauders of the north, known for their longships, pillaging prowess, and wait for it, their helmet feathers. Yes, dear reader, let's embark on a journey through the ruffled and often overlooked history of Viking helmet feathers and the astonishingly bureaucratic world that surrounded them. Prepare yourself for regional variations, jaw-dropping laws, logistical labyrinths, and, of course, a sprinkle of grotesque anecdote to whet your appetite for the absurd. Regional variations over time. Let's not kid ourselves, Vikings were nothing if not diverse. Sure, they could all swing an axe with gusto, but when it came to their helmets, things got deeply regional. In the fjords of Norway, for instance, a feathered helmet might feature the preening plumage of the native puffin, a bird renowned for its ability to look utterly ridiculous while also being quite efficient at catching fish. Meanwhile, in Sweden, warriors sported flamboyant peacock feathers, making them look like they were auditioning for a role in a Viking-themed Broadway musical rather than preparing for battle. By the time we hit the 10th century, the feather game had evolved yet again. Feathers were no longer just about looking fierce, they became a status symbol. In the bustling trade towns of Hedeby and Birka, Viking leaders would strut around with elaborate feather arrangements that could only be described as a bird exploded on their heads. Local laws even started to dictate what types of feathers could be worn by whom. Yes, you read that right, there were feather edicts. Only the finest crow feathers for the elite, one might decree, while the commoners were left to scavenge the leftovers of the feathered underclass. Laws, edicts, taxes, ledgers. Speaking of decrees, it turns out that feather regulations were not only fashionable but also deeply bureaucratic. Viking society was surprisingly sophisticated when it came to record keeping, especially when it involved taxes on feathers. The infamous feather tax of 972 had warriors scrambling to ensure that their headgear met the local ordinances. A ledger from that period shows that King Eric IV of Norway imposed a hefty tax on all feathers exceeding 6 inches in length, a regulation that caused quite a flap, pun intended, among the local warriors, who suddenly found themselves measuring their plumes with the same diligence one might use for an imperial decree. These laws didn't just stop at tax collection, they extended to the very logistics of feather procurement. Local lords were tasked with maintaining a database of feather suppliers and their regional specialties. The Feather Ledger of 978, an exhaustive tome, listed every supplier from Icelandic puffins to the elusive golden swan of the Baltic Sea. Each entry included not just the type of feather but also the fluffiness factor, which was a critical metric at the time. Logistics and supply chains. Now, let's talk logistics, an unsung hero in the world of feathered warfare. Picture this. A Viking chieftain in Norway decides he wants the finest feathers from the far reaches of Eastern Europe. This wasn't a simple task. No, there were shipping routes to consider, seasonal migrations of birds to track, and trade deals to negotiate with rival clans who might be less than enthusiastic about sharing their feathery resources. Enter the Feather Merchants Guild, a group so influential that they made the Silk Road look like a kiddie playground. These merchants had a network of spies, traders, and even feathery scouts, yes, you read that correctly, who would ensure that the choicest plumes were delivered to their clients in a timely fashion, lest their reputations be tarnished. The logistics involved in transporting these feathers were staggering. Ships made from the finest oak were outfitted with specialized compartments to keep feathers dry and fluffy, lest they arrive at the chieftain's hall looking more bedraggled than a rat in a rainstorm. There were even feather carrier warriors whose sole job was to guard these precious cargoes during transport. Imagine a burly Viking with a spear in one hand and a crate of peacock feathers in the other, standing watch as the ship navigated treacherous waters. It was a dangerous business, but someone had to do it. Record keeping with lots of specifics. Now, let's delve deeper into the fascinating world of record keeping. The Vikings were not just fierce warriors, they were also meticulous bureaucrats when it came to their beloved feathers. The aforementioned Feather Ledger of 978 wasn't just a dusty old book, it was a vibrant tapestry of documentation filled with all sorts of specifics. Each entry in the ledger included details such as the origin of the feathers, the number of plumes, the fluffiness factor, and even the price per ounce. The ledger also recorded any disputes that arose over feather quality, a surprisingly common occurrence. One entry reads, "Dispute between Eric the Brawny and Olaf the Featherless over the quality of crow feathers." Eric claims his are more robust, while Olaf argues his are less likely to shed. It was a feathered soap opera, really. The record-keeping didn't just stop at feathers, it extended to the people involved in the trade. There were entire sections dedicated to the feathered elite, a pantheon of warriors who had made a name for themselves through their extravagant feather displays. Notable figures like Bjorn, the Fluffy, and Astrid, the Ornate, were chronicled in detail, their feather-related exploits celebrated with the same fervor as epic battles. One surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. Now, every riveting history has its grotesque anecdotes, and Viking helmet feather regulations are no exception. While most people think of Vikings as fearless warriors, what they might not know is that their obsession with feathers sometimes led to some truly bizarre, and frankly ghastly, practices. In the late 10th century, a particularly ambitious Viking chieftain named Ragnar, the Overzealous, decided that he wanted the most extravagant helmet in history, one that would make even the gods themselves take notice. To achieve this, he commissioned a new kind of feather, one that was larger, fluffier, and more ostentatious than anything the world had seen. The problem? He needed a rare bird known as the sky stalker, which was said to have feathers that shimmered like the northern lights. In his desperation, Ragnar sent out hunting parties across the land. But here's where things took a dark turn. The sky stalker was not just rare, it was also notoriously hard to catch. Frustrated and running out of options, Ragnar's men resorted to a rather grotesque method of capture. They began luring the birds with bait made from the innards of other birds, specifically, the feathers of their rivals. Yes, you read that right. The Vikings went full circle, using the very feathers they sought to attract more feathers. The disturbing part? They managed to catch a few sky stalkers, but their helmets began to resemble something out of a horror movie rather than a majestic warrior's headpiece. The gruesome practice led to a backlash, and Ragnar's reputation as a leader took a dive. His once feared helmet became a cautionary tale, beware the man whose feathers are soaked in the blood of his enemies. Conclusion. So there you have it, the riveting, bureaucratic, and occasionally grotesque history of Viking helmet feathers and the standardized fluff regulations that governed them. From regional variations that turned warriors into fashionistas to the vast logistics involved in feather procurement, the Viking obsession with plumes was anything but mundane. Next time you envision a Viking, remember that it wasn't just axes and shields they wielded, it was also a bewildering array of feathers, laws, and a penchant for the audacious. So raise a toast to the feathered helmets of history, may they continue to ruffle some feathers in the annals of time. #### The tedious history of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations. Ah, the Vikings! Tall tales of pillaging and plundering, of sea voyages and sagas, have painted them as the ultimate warriors. But among their many exploits, one particularly delightful aspect of their culture has been overlooked: the baffling, convoluted history of helmet feathers and the birth of standardized fluff regulations. Buckle up, dear reader, for a dive into a world where bureaucratic absurdity meets the heights of Norse fashion. ######### Regional variations over time. When one thinks of Viking helmets, images of fierce warriors with horned headgear often come to mind. Yet, as with any fashion statement, regional variations existed. In Norway, for instance, the feathered helmets were all the rage, often adorned with brightly colored plumes that would make a peacock weep with envy. Meanwhile, in Denmark, the trend leaned towards a more minimalist approach. Think of it as the IKEA version of Viking headwear. Here, a single, tastefully arranged feather was the epitome of understated elegance. The Swedish, not to be outdone, developed an affinity for vibrant blue and yellow feathers, perhaps a nod to their national colors, or maybe a subconscious rivalry with the Danes. Indeed, Viking helmet fashion was a veritable melting pot of regional pride and vanity, resulting in a mishmash of colors and styles that would have made the fashion police of any era swoon in horror. But with great style came great responsibility. As these regional variations blossomed, the need for order, nay, regulation, arose. Enter the first of many edicts that would govern the feathered frenzy. In 874 AD, the infamous Edict of Fluff was issued by none other than King Eric the Slightly Overzealous, who, upon noticing that his warriors' headgear resembled a chaotic aviary, decided it was time to standardize the standards of fluff. ####### Laws, edicts, taxes, and ledgers. The Edict of Fluff mandated that all Viking helmets adhere to a strict set of guidelines. No longer could warriors merely slap on any old bird feathers they encountered, they now had to comply with specific regulations regarding feather length, color, and species. Feathered warriors were required to keep meticulous records, detailing every plume they affixed to their helmets. Crows, 3, blue jays, 2, and one particularly glorious peacock feather from a naval raid in the Mediterranean. The ledgers became a veritable who's who of avian contributions to Viking warfare. However, as with any good regulation, the Edict of Fluff spawned its own set of challenges. Enter the feather tax of 875 AD. Yes, you read that right, a tax on feathers. The rationale behind this delightful piece of legislation was that the crown needed a steady income to fund its ongoing quest for more feathers, more helmets, and more, well, kerfuffles. The Viking bureaucracy soon became a tangled mess as warriors, instead of honing their battle skills, found themselves mired in tax forms and ledger disputes. ##### logistics and supply chains. With regulations in place and taxes being collected, the logistics of feather supply chains emerged as a critical aspect of Viking life. Imagine the logistical nightmare: a band of burly Vikings, fresh off their longship, standing around scratching their heads as they try to figure out how to get a shipment of peacock feathers from the lush coasts of Iberia back to their homeland. The Great Feather Trade Route was born, connecting various regions and fostering a sort of feathery black market. Merchants would load their ships with crates of feathers, navigating treacherous waters while dodging not only rival Viking factions but also the pesky tax collectors who were eager to enforce the feather tax. A simple trip to procure helmet adornments could easily turn into a life-or-death endeavor, all for the sake of looking fabulous on the battlefield. As the years passed, supply chain issues became a recurring theme. There were reports of shipments gone awry, feathers arriving soggy from a rainstorm, or worse, infested with lice, which, let's face it, is not the kind of accessory anyone wants. The scandal of the lice incident of 890 AD still echoes through history, with many a warrior swearing off imported feathers for life. The resulting local sourcing movement led to a boom in domestic feather farms, causing an unexpected surge in the poultry industry. Who knew that the Viking Age would spur an agricultural revolution? ##### record keeping with lots of specifics. To ensure compliance with the Edict of Fluff and the notorious feather tax, every Viking settlement established a record-keeping system that would make modern accountants weep with envy. Each warrior was assigned a fluff ledger, a small booklet where they meticulously recorded their feather inventory, tax payments, and any exchanges made. These ledgers became a treasure trove of historical data, chronicling not just fashion choices but also the ebb and flow of local economies. The specifics were painstakingly detailed. 2 red feathers from the battle at Lindisfarne, 1 yellow plume gifted by the neighboring jarl, and 3 assorted feathers obtained during a drunken raid on a local poultry farm. The absurdity of the details is only matched by the fervor with which these records were maintained. The Fluff auditors, a group of overly serious individuals, would often emerge from the shadows to scrutinize the ledgers, ensuring that every feather accounted for was, in fact, legitimate and tax-compliant. In 901 AD, a particularly notorious audit revealed rampant feather fraud, where warriors had been swapping out expensive peacock feathers for cheap crow feathers. The ensuing scandal, known as the Feathergate Affair, led to public shaming, with the culprits forced to wear their own fraudulent feathers in a fluff of shame ceremony. It was a dark day for Viking fashion, but, as they say, one man's disgrace is another man's trend. ############################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################### borderline grotesque anecdote. In the midst of all this feathery fervor, a dark and somewhat grotesque anecdote emerged that would forever haunt the Viking legacy. Legend has it that during a particularly harsh winter, when the supply chains were disrupted, and feathers were scarce, a desperate band of warriors resorted to a shocking solution. Rather than face the embarrassment of being featherless on the battlefield, they turned to an unusual source for their headgear. In a move that would make even the most hardened Viking cringe, these warriors began collecting feathers from the corpses of fallen birds and, in some cases, the unfortunate souls who had succumbed to the cold. Yes, that's right, the feather harvest of 902 AD involved scavenging feathers from the dead, both avian and human. The practice was so widespread that it sparked a new expression among the warriors: better dead than featherless. This grotesque turn of events was met with mixed reactions. While some hailed it as a resourceful solution in dire times, others deemed it a sacrilegious affront to the Norse gods. The saga of this bizarre practice spread far and wide, becoming the stuff of legends, cautionary tales told to children around the fire at night. Always keep your feathers close, or you might end up with a crow on your head that belonged to someone else. Conclusion. Thus, the history of Viking helmet feathers and the standardized fluff regulations is a tale of fashion, bureaucracy, and the absurd lengths to which people will go to maintain their dignity, even in the face of death. From regional variations to the chaotic logistics of feather supply chains, the Vikings' obsession with helmet adornments reveals the complexities of their culture. And let's not forget the hilariously grotesque anecdotes that add a splash of dark humor to the saga. So next time you find yourself in a conversation about Viking history, don't just stick to tales of raids and conquests. Bring up the feathered helmets, the taxes, and the bizarre lengths to which they went to uphold their fashion standards. Because history, after all, is often stranger, and much more entertaining, than fiction. The tedious history of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations. Ah, the Viking Age, a time of fierce warriors, longships slicing through the frosty waves, and, of course, the glorious, feathered helmets that have become the hallmark of Scandinavian badassery. While most folks wax poetic about the savage raids and epic sagas of Norse mythology, few dare to delve into the insufferably intricate world of Viking helmet feathers. Prepare yourself for a journey through regional variations, laws, taxes, logistics, record-keeping, and even a rather grotesque anecdote that will make you reconsider your next trip to the local Renaissance fair. Regional variations over time. First off, let's talk about the feather situation. You might think that Viking helmets were a one-size-fits-all affair, an easy choice between feathered or not feathered. But, oh no, dear reader, you would be gravely mistaken. The Viking world was as diverse as a modern-day IKEA catalog, with each region flaunting its own unique flair. In the northern reaches of Scandinavia, helmets were often adorned with the majestic plumes of the Arctic ptarmigan, an elegant bird that could camouflage itself against the snow. These feathers were not just for show, they were a statement. Look at me. I'm fierce, but also fabulously fashionable. Meanwhile, in southern regions, feathers from the more flamboyant peacock were all the rage. Yes, nothing screams, "Fear me," like a Viking warrior with a shimmering green tail bobbing behind him. As time marched on, the trends evolved. By the late 10th century, the feathered look was being replaced by a more streamlined, no-nonsense design. Helmets were becoming functional rather than just fabulous, and the once cherished plumes were often relegated to ceremonial displays. It was as if the Vikings had collectively decided that while they loved a good fashion statement, practicality in battle was slightly more pressing. ##### laws, edicts, taxes, and ledgers. Now, enter the bureaucratic nightmare that was the Viking legal system. Yes, you heard me right. The Vikings were not just marauding barbarians, they were surprisingly adept at governance. And what's governance without a healthy dose of laws and regulations? Feathers, it turns out, were subject to serious scrutiny. In 965 AD, King Harald Bluetooth, he of the famous wireless technology fame, issued the first known edict regarding helmet feathers. Let it be known, he declared, that all warriors shall wear a helmet adorned with feathers no longer than 6 inches. Anyone found with excessive fluff shall be taxed accordingly. This decree sent shockwaves through the Viking community, sparking debates in taverns about the length of a warrior's plume and the appropriateness of a fluff tax. The ramifications were immense. Local chieftains were tasked with enforcing the new regulations, leading to the establishment of feather inspectors, an elite corps of warriors armed not with swords, but with tape measures and a keen eye for style. Ah, yes, they would say, inspecting a helmet with a critical squint, this feather clearly exceeds the 6-inch limit. You, sir, owe me 5 drachmas. As if the taxman wasn't enough, let's not forget the voluminous ledgers that chronicled these transactions. Viking scribes, often overlooked in favor of their more glamorous warrior counterparts, were busy recording each fine and tax imposed on helmet fluff. Their meticulous notes would include the name of the offending warrior, the length of the offending feather, and even the color. Fluffy red, exceeding maximum length, a scandalous offense. #### logistics and supply chains. Now, let's pivot to logistics. You may not have realized this, but the Viking Age was a golden era for supply chains, if you could overlook the occasional raid and pillaging. The demand for feathers was soaring, and the logistics of acquiring them were nothing short of remarkable. Feather procurement involved a vast network of trade routes that extended from the frigid fjords of Norway to the sunny shores of the Mediterranean. Traders would venture far and wide, swapping precious furs and weapons for exotic feathers. Imagine the absurdity, a burly Viking trading a finely crafted sword for a sack of colorful feathers, all while puffing out his chest, "Behold my shimmering plumage." The logistics didn't stop with mere acquisition. The transportation of these delicate adornments was a veritable challenge. Feathers were considered a luxury item, often traveling in bespoke crates lined with hay to prevent crushing. The Vikings had to navigate treacherous waters and hostile territories, all while ensuring that the feathers arrived intact. One can only imagine the sigh of relief when a trader finally delivered the precious cargo, only to find that half of it was now a feathery mess. #### record keeping with lots of specifics. Then there was the record keeping, a task that seems mundane yet was vital for the maintenance of order in the feathered helmet economy. Local chieftains kept detailed records of helmet inspections, taxes collected, and trades made. These ledgers were meticulously maintained, often in runic script, with each entry resembling a cryptic puzzle only a true Viking scholar could decipher. One notable scribe, Egil the Efficient, became a legend in his own right for his unparalleled attention to detail. Egil's ledger famously featured a section titled, Feather Length and Tax Assessment, where he painstakingly recorded each warrior's helmet adornment. He even had a system of codes, R for red feathers, B for blue, and P for peacock. Historians still ponder the significance of the F entry, which remains a mystery to this day. Was it an abbreviation for fluffy, or perhaps feathered fiasco? Hashtag a surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. Now, we can't wrap up our feathered escapade without a rather grotesque anecdote that only the Vikings could conjure. Amidst the flurry of feather regulations and logistics, a tale emerged of a particularly overzealous feather inspector named Bjorn the Ruthless. Bjorn was notorious for his strict enforcement of the fluff tax, and he took his responsibilities very seriously. One fateful day, a warrior named Thorgal presented himself for inspection. Thorgal sported an impressive helmet adorned with feathers that exceeded the legal limit. "Bjorn, I swear on Odin's beard, I didn't know," he pleaded. But Bjorn was unmoved. "The law is the law, Thorgal. You owe me 10 drachmas and a public apology." In a shocking twist, Thorgal's punishment involved a rather grotesque spectacle. To demonstrate the consequences of excessive fluff, Bjorn ordered Thorgal to don a helmet made entirely of feathers that were not only illegal in length but also sourced from the local butcher's shop. Yes, you read that right, a helmet made of chicken feathers, complete with the still attached heads. The sight was so absurd that it left the gathered crowd in fits of laughter, but it also served as a cautionary tale. From that day on, the phrase, "Don't end up like Thorgal," became a common adage among the warriors, a reminder that the fluff tax was no laughing matter. Conclusion. As we conclude our meandering exploration of the tedious history of Viking helmet feathers and the corresponding regulations, we are left with a clearer picture of a society that balanced fierce warrior culture with the absurdities of bureaucracy. While they may have been warriors of renown, the Vikings were also masters of logistics, record-keeping, and, dare we say, fashion. So, the next time you see a Viking reenactor sporting a feathered helmet, take a moment to appreciate not just the aesthetic, but the rich, convoluted history behind it, complete with laws, taxes, and a healthy dash of grotesque humor. After all, in the grand tapestry of history, it's often the minutiae that prove most entertaining. And who knows? Perhaps one day you'll be inspired to don a feathered helmet of your own, just make sure it's within the legal limit. The tedious history of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations. Once upon a time, in a world where the seas were as wild as a Norse god on a bender and pillaging was all the rage, the Vikings were not just renowned for their longships and their penchant for raiding churches. No, dear reader, they were also the proud purveyors of headgear that was all the rage, the horned helmet. But let us not be fooled into thinking these helmets were mere vessels for their noggins. They were also the canvas for some of history's most perplexing and, dare we say, frivolous regulations regarding feathers. Yes, you heard that right, Viking helmet feathers and their accompanying fluff regulations. Let's embark on a journey that will take us through the ages, from the savage shores of Scandinavia to the dusty ledgers of the local chieftains, where the minutiae of feathered adornments were chronicled with the same fervor as battle victories. #### Regional variations over time. As with any trend that involves bold-fashioned statements, or, as we like to call it, pillage chic, the Viking helmet feather scene was anything but uniform. In the early days of the Viking Age, roughly 793–1066 CE, for those of you taking notes, the helmets were decidedly practical. Think of a sturdy cap of iron with little embellishment. But as the Viking spirit evolved, so too did their penchant for ostentation. By the 10th century, we see the emergence of feathered helmets, and each region developed its unique style. The Norwegians, for instance, favored the plumage of the majestic puffin, which, according to ancient texts, was as loud as the bellowing of a drunken skald. Meanwhile, the Danes had an affinity for swan feathers, which were said to embody the grace of their longboats as they glided across the fjords. The Swedes? Well, they were a bit more avant-garde, opting for the vibrant feathers of tropical birds, which was a scandalous choice given their geographical limitations. We can only imagine the perplexed looks on the faces of their fellow raiders when they showed up in battle sporting feathers that belonged in a parrot's wardrobe. #### Laws, edicts, taxes, ledgers. With great fluff comes great responsibility. As the popularity of feathered helmets surged, so too did the desire for regulation. Enter the infamous Edict of Feathers, issued by King Bjorn the Bureaucratic in 950 CE. This decree mandated that all Viking helmets must adhere to specific guidelines regarding feather type, length, and arrangement. For instance, any helmet adorned with feathers exceeding 6 inches in length was subject to a hefty tax, as it was deemed excessively flamboyant. You see, practicality was key for these seafaring marauders. Long feathers could easily snag on low branches during raids or, heaven forbid, get caught in the rigging of a longship. And who could forget the scandal of 964 CE when a Viking warrior lost his helmet during a raid, and the subsequent investigation revealed that he had not only disregarded the height limit but had also embellished his helmet with the plumes of an endangered phoenix. The warrior was not only fined but also had to endure mockery for his fashion faux pas, a fate worse than death in Viking culture. Record-keeping became an art form during this era, with chieftains employing scribes to meticulously log every feathered transaction. The ledgers of the time reveal an astonishing amount of detail: feather type, price per inch, and even the social standing of the wearer. One particularly amusing entry details a transaction involving a pair of swan's feathers sold to a farmer's son who wanted to impress a local shield maiden. The lad, however, was later found trampled by a particularly upset swan, leading to a new regulation that mandated that all feathered helmets must be accompanied by a swan safety clause. Hashtag logistics and supply chains. Now, as any good historian will tell you, logistics is the backbone of any successful venture. The Vikings were not just brute force, they were also savvy businessmen. The feather trade flourished, thanks to a complex network of supply chains that would make modern logistics experts weep with envy. Feathers were sourced from all over the Nordic region, with the finest plumage coming from the most remote corners of the fjords. This led to the development of specialized, feather merchants, who traveled from village to village, much like modern-day door-to-door salesmen, peddling their wares. These merchants were known to barter with everything from silver to fish, all in the name of securing the most exquisite feathers for their clientele. The logistics of transporting these delicate items were no small feat. It was not uncommon for a merchant to lose an entire shipment of feathers to the treacherous waters of the North Sea. One particularly notorious incident involved a merchant named Eric the Featherless, who lost an entire cargo of prized peacock feathers when his ship capsized. Legend has it that Eric, in a fit of despair, attempted to fashion a new helmet out of seaweed, claiming it was the new wave of Viking fashion. Spoiler alert, it didn't catch on. Hashtag record keeping with lots of specifics. As the feather trade expanded, so did the need for meticulous record keeping. The Viking Age saw the rise of the feather ledger, a tome that catalogued every feather transaction across the known world. These ledgers were often ornate, bound in leather and embellished with intricate carvings of birds. It was said that a well-kept ledger could be a chieftain's pride and joy, a reflection of their status and wealth. One particularly famous ledger belonged to Joran the Just, a chieftainess known for her exceptional taste in feathers. Her records detailed not only the types of feathers purchased but also the circumstances of each transaction. For example, an entry from 976 CE notes, acquired 3 ostrich feathers from Bjorn the Bold for 2 barrels of mead and a promise of safe passage through his territory. Note: Bjorn is now barred from future transactions due to excessive boasting about his superior plumage. For any aspiring historians, perusing these ledgers is like stepping into the mind of a Viking feather enthusiast. There are even entries that detail the heights of different feathers, with one particularly poetic note: the peacock feather, a symbol of grace, measures at 12 inches, while the crow feather, a harbinger of mischief, at a mere 6 inches. Beware the crow, for it is a trickster in the realm of fashion. Hashtag one surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. And now, dear reader, we arrive at the piece de resistance of our exploration, the grotesque anecdote that will haunt your dreams and make you question the very nature of Viking fashion. In the year 1000 CE, during the height of the feather craze, a particularly ambitious blacksmith named Olaf the Ornate decided that he would create the most magnificent feathered helmet the world had ever seen. He gathered every kind of feather he could find: peacock, swan, and even a few from the local ducks. But Olaf was not satisfied with mere aesthetics. He wanted to make a statement. In a fit of inspiration, or perhaps madness, he decided to complete his masterpiece with the addition of the most bizarre accessory imaginable: a taxidermied ferret wearing a tiny Viking helmet perched atop the crown of the helmet. The result was nothing short of horrifying. The helmet became known as Olaf's Folly, and while it turned heads, often in disgust, it also became the stuff of legend. During a raid, Olaf, wearing his infamous helmet, was struck by an arrow. In a twist of fate, the arrow lodged itself in the taxidermied ferret, sending it flying into the air like a projectile of doom. The sight of a ferret soaring through the sky in a tiny helmet caused such confusion among the enemy that they fled in terror, believing it to be a divine omen. Olaf, however, was not so fortunate. He became known as the Ferret-Faced Warrior, a title that haunted him for the rest of his days. His helmet, once a symbol of grandeur, became a cautionary tale taught to young Vikings: beware the folly of flamboyance, for in the pursuit of beauty, one may find oneself a laughingstock. ###conclusion. And there you have it, the perplexing yet oddly entertaining saga of Viking helmet feathers and their standardized fluff regulations. From regional variations to the absurdities of logistics, this tale weaves together the threads of history, humor, and a healthy dose of irreverence. So, the next time you see a Viking helmet or hear tales of their ferocious raids, remember the feathered fiascos that once adorned their heads. For beneath the bravado of the Vikings lay an intricate tapestry of laws, ledgers, and, let's be honest, some downright ridiculous fashion choices that would make even the fiercest warrior blush. In the immortal words of a Viking bard, feathers may flutter, but true style never falters, unless, of course, you're wearing a taxidermied ferret. In the grand tapestry of history, where the threads of valor and conquest intertwine with the occasional tapestry of bureaucratic banality, we find ourselves drawn to one of the most misunderstood and, dare I say, feather-brained topics: the history of Viking helmet feathers and the standardized fluff regulations that govern them. Yes, while you may have imagined a glorious Viking swinging axes in battle, there was a whole other side to these Norse warriors, the bureaucrats, armed not with swords but with quills, who sought to impose order on the chaos of fluffy adornments. ###regional variations over time. Let us begin our exploration with the regional variations of Viking helmet feathers, which, much like the flavors of lutefisk, varied greatly depending on where you found yourself in the Scandinavian landscape. In Norway, for instance, the preferred plume for helmet embellishment was often a straightforward affair: the classic crow feather, dark and brooding, much like the weather. Norse warriors believed that the crow's association with Odin lent a certain gravitas to their headgear, striking fear into the hearts of their enemies and perhaps making them look a tad more dashing. Meanwhile, in Denmark, the feather game took a more flamboyant turn. The local warriors, perhaps inspired by their proximity to the continent, opted for peacock feathers, resplendent in color and flamboyance. It was a bold fashion statement, a way of saying, yes, I pillage, but I also have a keen eye for style. The peacock, with its iridescent plumes, was not just a choice of decoration, it was a declaration of individuality amid the collective Viking identity. However, as with all things fabulous and feathery, this penchant for flamboyance soon attracted the attention of the powers that be. As regional variations flourished, so did the need for some form of regulation. Enter the Viking bureaucracy, a group of individuals who would rather debate the merits of feather length than engage in actual combat. Hashtag laws, edicts, taxes, and ledgers. In the year 842, mark your calendars, King Ragnari, known for his striking helmet adorned with a particularly extravagant set of peacock feathers, issued the first known edict regarding the use of helmet feathers. The Fluff regulation of 842 mandated that all Viking helmets must not only have feathers but also adhere to specific lengths and colors, lest they be deemed disorderly or not sufficiently intimidating. This was the beginning of what we might call the Viking Feather Wars, a series of edicts and counter-edicts that would send the Norse world into a veritable tizzy. Taxation soon followed, because what better way to fund your conquests than to extract coins from your own warriors for the privilege of sporting fine plumage? The feather tax was introduced, requiring warriors to pay a small fee based on the type and quantity of feathers on their helmets. Crows. A mere pittance. Peacocks. Now that would cost you, because, as we all know, nothing screams, "I'm a fearsome warrior," like a helmet that could also serve as a flamboyant centerpiece at a banquet. And let's not forget the ledgers. Oh, the ledgers. Some enterprising scribe took it upon himself to meticulously record every feather transaction across the lands. The Viking Feather Ledger became a tome of epic proportions, filled with details that would make any modern accountant weep with envy. Each entry included the type of feather, the warrior's name, the location, and, of course, the associated tax. It was a veritable who's who of Viking feather fashion, and the scribe's penmanship was rivaled only by the finest calligraphers of the age. Hashtag logistics and supply chains. As you might imagine, regulating feathers was not merely a matter of edicts and ledgers, it required a supply chain that would make modern logistics experts nod in approval, and perhaps a little disbelief. The demand for specific feathers led to a thriving trade network across Scandinavia. Crows were hunted in the forests of Norway, while peacocks were imported from the Mediterranean, often at great expense and risk. Imagine a Viking longship, laden with exotic feathers, braving the storms of the North Sea, all to meet the demands of a warrior who simply had to have the latest in feather fashion. The feathers were not just plucked and shipped, they underwent a rigorous quality control process. Those tasked with the inspection donned their own helmets, adorned with the finest feathers, and inspected each shipment for any signs of imperfection. A feather that was deemed subpar could lead to an immediate loss of status for the warrior it was intended for. After all, who wants to be known as the warrior with the sad, droopy feather? Moreover, the logistics didn't stop at sourcing the feathers. Distribution centers, often located in strategic coastal towns, emerged as hubs for feather-related commerce. The feathery exchange, in what is now Oslo, became a bustling marketplace, where traders negotiated prices, bartered for the rarest plumes, and engaged in the kind of haggling that would make modern-day eBay look like child's play. Hashtag record keeping with lots of specifics. The meticulous nature of Viking record-keeping extended beyond mere inventories. Historians unearthed records detailing the specifics of feather types, colors, and even the occasional fashion faux pas. For instance, One particularly notorious entry from the year 845 noted the unfortunate incident of a warrior who attempted to dye his helmet feathers a vibrant blue using crushed berries, only to have them run in the rain during a particularly ill-timed raid, leaving him looking like a bedraggled peacock in a downpour. Another entry documented an entire shipment of exotic red feathers from a distant land, which caused quite the stir among the Viking elite. However, as it turned out, the feathers were mistakenly identified as coming from a rare species of bird, leading to a temporary shortage and a very awkward apology from the local chieftain who had confidently declared himself the Feather Baron. ####A surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. Now, dear reader, let's pivot to the more grotesque side of the feather trade. For all the pomp and circumstance surrounding Viking helmet feathers, there was a darker underbelly to this avian obsession. The legend of the Great Feather Caper of 849 is one that sends shivers down the spines of even the most hardened warriors. It began innocently enough, with rumors circulating about an exotic bird from the east boasting feathers so bright and luxurious that they could blind an enemy at 50 paces. Naturally, a few enterprising Vikings set out to capture this fowl, envisioning themselves as the ultimate trendsetters of the battlefield. However, what they discovered was far more grotesque than they anticipated. The bird, once caught, turned out to be a rare species that produced a secretion that smelled like a cross between a rotting fish and an unwashed sock. The warriors, undeterred by the stench, decided to go ahead and use the feathers anyway, proudly donning their newfound plumage. But as they marched into battle, the combination of the pungent aroma and the vibrant colors had an unexpected effect. Not only did their enemies flee in terror, partly due to the sight of these bizarrely adorned warriors, but so did their own comrades. The Viking horde, now a mix of laughter and retching, found themselves laughing uncontrollably, unable to take their own rank seriously. Thus, the Great Feather Caper became a cautionary tale, reminding future generations of Vikings that while fashion may be fleeting, the stench of poor choices lingers long after the battle is over. ###conclusion. So, there you have it, the tedious yet oddly fascinating history of Viking helmet feathers and the standardized fluff regulations that govern them. Amidst the tales of conquest and bravery, we find a quirky, bureaucratic side of the Vikings that is every bit as compelling as their legendary raids. From the regional variations in feather choices to the complex logistics of supply chains and record-keeping, it is a story that reminds us that even the fiercest of warriors had to contend with the mundane realities of feather fashion. Next time you picture a Viking, perhaps take a moment to imagine the scribe, the tax collector, and the bewildered warrior wrestling with the latest regulations, because history is indeed a patchwork of valor, absurdity, and the occasional grotesque adventure. And let's be honest, without those feathers, we might have missed out on some of the best stories ever told. ###The tedious history of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations. When we think of Vikings, our minds often conjure images of fierce warriors with horned helmets, brandishing swords and axes as they pillage and conquer. However, lurking beneath the surface of this fierce imagery lies an equally captivating and often overlooked aspect of Viking culture, the regulation of helmet feathers and the perplexing bureaucracy that accompanied it. This article seeks to explore the minor figures, petty rules, and case studies that shaped the history of Viking helmet feathers, alongside comparisons to other regions, archaeological tidbits, and the curious questions that arise from this seemingly mundane topic. ##### Minor figures and petty rules. Viking society was not solely composed of grand chieftains and ruthless warriors. It was also populated by an array of minor figures who played pivotal roles in the day-to-day life of their communities. One such figure was Ragnhild the Feather Keeper, a lesser-known woman from the 9th century who is said to have spearheaded the first known regulations concerning the fluffiness and color of feathers used in Viking helmets. According to sagas, Ragnhild was a fierce proponent of fluff equality, arguing that all warriors, regardless of status, should have equal access to high-quality feathers to ensure uniformity in their appearance. Her advocacy led to the establishment of the Feather Guild, a collective of feather suppliers who were responsible for maintaining standards. The guild implemented a series of petty rules, including feather length regulation. Feathers were required to be no longer than 6 inches, to ensure they did not obstruct vision or become entangled in enemies' weapons during battle. Color specification: only specific colors, predominantly gray, white, and black, were allowed, as vibrant colors were thought to distract from the warrior's prowess. Fluff factor: a standardized fluff factor was developed, measured by the number of individual barbs per inch, which determined the quality of the feather. Warriors caught using substandard fluff faced penalties, including fines or temporary ostracization from the Feather Guild. Ragnhild's efforts, although seemingly trivial in the grand narrative of Viking conquests, highlighted the intricate social structures and the importance of appearances within their culture. ######Case studies with dates and lists. Various case studies can shed light on the evolution of helmet feather regulations throughout the Viking Age. One notable incident occurred in 854 AD, when a dispute arose between two Viking clans in what is now Denmark over the quality of helmet adornments. The feather fiasco of 854 began when a warrior from the Rafn clan accused a member of the Bjorn clan of using inferior feathers that failed the fluff factor test. The ensuing conflict escalated into a full-blown feud, leading to a series of skirmishes that lasted several months. In an effort to mediate, the local jarl called for a feather summit, where representatives from both clans presented their feather samples for inspection. The ruling, delivered after much deliberation, mandated the following. 1. Official feather inspectors. The establishment of designated inspectors to evaluate feather quality before battles. 2. Feather trials. A formal trial process for disputes over feather quality, complete with a panel of judges made up of respected warriors and guild members. 3. Feather penalties. A system of fines based on the severity of the violation, ranging from minor fines for using slightly inferior feathers to expulsion from the clan for habitual offenders. This incident reflects how something as trivial as helmet adornments could spark major conflicts among Viking clans, illustrating the intertwining of honor, reputation, and even humor in Viking culture. Another significant case study occurred in 972 AD, when a Viking ship was discovered off the coast of Norway, complete with a treasure trove of helmet feathers. Archaeological excavations revealed an array of feathers, some with intricate dye patterns that hinted at the use of exotic materials. This led to the hypothesis that some Viking warriors, particularly those engaged in trading expeditions, had access to luxury items that were not readily available to their peers at home. The finds from this ship prompted a reconsideration of the existing rules about helmet feathers, leading to the following adjustments. Luxury feather allowance. The introduction of a limited quota for using exotic feathers, to be determined by the Jarl based on the wealth of the clan. Cultural exchange feathers, a provision that allowed warriors returning from foreign lands to bring back unique feathers, provided they complied with local standards. Comparisons to other regions. While the Viking regulations regarding helmet feathers might seem frivolous, they were not unique. Other cultures also placed significant importance on the adornment of warriors' helmets, though the standards varied widely. In ancient Rome, for instance, soldiers often donned crested helmets that featured horsehair plumes. These were not only decorative but also served practical purposes, such as indicating rank and status among the legions. Similarly, in the samurai culture of feudal Japan, helmet decorations were meticulously regulated. The kabuto, or helmet, often featured ornate designs that conveyed the wearer's clan allegiance and personal achievements. Regulations dictated the use of certain colors and motifs, echoing the Viking obsession with feather quality and appearance. Interestingly, one might ask, what does the regulation of helmet adornments reveal about the values and priorities of a society? Is it possible that such seemingly trivial aspects of culture reflect deeper societal norms? Archaeological tidbits. The archaeological record provides tantalizing glimpses into the Viking obsession with helmet feathers and their significance. In 1950, excavations at the burial site of a Viking warrior in England unearthed a remarkably preserved helmet adorned with feathers. Initial analyses suggested that the feathers had been carefully selected for their aerodynamic properties, indicating that Vikings were not only concerned with aesthetics but also functionality. Moreover, the discovery of a Viking grave in Sweden in 2020 revealed a collection of feather remnants alongside the remains of a powerful chieftain. The feathers, once vibrant, were believed to have been dyed using natural pigments derived from plants and minerals. This discovery sheds light on the elaborate lengths to which Vikings went to ensure their helmets were both visually striking and culturally significant. Such archaeological findings raise further questions. To what extent did helmet adornments influence the outcomes of battles? Were warriors judged more by their flamboyant headpieces than by their martial skills? The legacy of Viking helmet regulations. The legacy of Viking helmet feather regulations extends beyond the mere historical record. The influence of these standards can still be felt today, as modern interpretations of Viking culture often emphasize the importance of appearance and status in social interactions. Contemporary reenactments and popular media frequently depict Vikings adorned with elaborate helmets, often reflecting a romanticized view of their warrior ethos while ignoring the mundane yet fascinating details of their regulations. In conclusion, the seemingly trivial topic of Viking helmet feathers and the associated regulations offers a unique lens through which we can explore Viking culture. From minor figures like Ragnhild the Feather Keeper to the petty rules and case studies that shaped their society, the intricate bureaucracy surrounding helmet adornments reveals much about the values and priorities of the Vikings. As we delve deeper into this aspect of their history, we find ourselves pondering the larger questions of identity, status, and the ways in which even the most mundane details can have profound implications for the cultural narrative of a society. So, the next time you envision a Viking warrior charging into battle, remember that beneath the ferocity lies a complex tapestry of social norms, regulations, and perhaps, a hint of humor that shaped their world. What might we learn about our own contemporary standards of appearance and identity by examining the past? And could it be that, just like the Vikings, we too are unwittingly embroiled in our own peculiar regulations surrounding the adornment of our identities? The tedious history of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations. The Viking Age, spanning from approximately 793 to 1066 CE, is often romanticized as an era of fierce warriors, daring raids, and epic sagas. However, beneath the surface of this adventurous narrative lies an often overlooked aspect of Viking culture, the perplexing world of helmet feathers and their associated regulations. While it may seem trivial compared to tales of conquest, the meticulous attention to detail regarding helmet adornment speaks volumes about Viking society's values and norms. What can these feathers tell us about the people who wore them? And why were certain fluff regulations deemed necessary among the warriors of the North? Minor figures and petty rules. In the grand tapestry of Viking history, minor figures often emerge as unsung heroes or, in this case, unwitting enforcers of fluff regulations. Among them, we find Astrid the Feathered, a lesser-known chieftain's wife from the late 9th century, who gained notoriety for her strict adherence to the Feather Code of 882 CE. Local lore suggests that Astrid would host monthly gatherings where warriors were required to present their helmets for inspection. It is said that any helmet lacking the appropriate feather arrangement would be deemed unworthy, leading to public ridicule or, worse, exclusion from raids. The Feather Code of 882 CE outlines several key specifications. 1. Feather type. Only feathers from specific birds, such as the Eurasian eagle owl and the common raven, were permissible. 2. Color regulations. Helmets adorned with feathers must follow a color scheme based on the warrior's clan. For instance, the red feathered helmets of the Skjoldungs indicated a lineage of nobility, while the more subdued gray of the Lothbrok clan signified a warrior's humble beginnings. 3. Fluff density. A strict guideline dictated that the fluffiness of feathers must be proportional to the wearer's status. Higher-ranking warriors were required to sport bulkier, more flamboyant displays, while common foot soldiers were restricted to a single plume. Astrid's rule may have been dictated by the peculiar notion that a warrior's fighting prowess was somehow correlated with his helmet's decorative capabilities. The more extravagant the feathers, the more intimidating the warrior appeared. Case studies with dates and lists. In 911 CE, the town of Birka, a significant trading hub, became the site of an infamous trial known as the Feather Trials. During this event, 5 warriors were accused of violating the feather code by sporting feathers from the forbidden golden pheasant. The case drew a significant crowd, and the proceedings were marked by heated debates over the cultural implications of feather choice. The evidence presented included witness testimonies. Several villagers claimed they had seen the warriors donning the illegal feathers during a raid on Lindisfarne. Physical evidence. Feathers were retrieved from the remains of the warriors' helmets. Cultural impact. A local bard, Eirik the Rhymer, composed a ballad lamenting the decline of traditional values due to feather-related misdemeanors. Ultimately, the 5 warriors were found guilty and sentenced to a month of community service, during which they were required to weave new helmets adorned only with locally sourced feathers, thus reinforcing the importance of local customs and traditions. In 1025 CE, the Viking community of Gard witnessed a different kind of feather-related scandal. A young warrior named Bjorn the Brazen, known for his audacious raiding strategies, attempted to revolutionize helmet fashion by introducing a style that involved layering feathers in a manner reminiscent of peacock plumage. This flamboyant design was met with fierce opposition from traditionalists. A public debate ensued, with factions forming to either support or condemn Bjorn's avant-garde approach. The outcome? A feather summit was convened in 1026 CE, where an official decree was issued. Let it be known that while creativity is encouraged, the integrity of our traditions shall not be compromised. Comparisons to other regions. The Viking obsession with helmet feathers was not an isolated phenomenon. Across Europe and beyond, various cultures exhibited similar tendencies regarding headgear adornment. In the Byzantine Empire, for instance, elaborate headdresses were symbols of status and power. Emperors would don crowns embellished with precious gems and feathers, signifying their divine right to rule. Similarly, among the Native American tribes of the Great Plains, feathered headdresses symbolized bravery and achievements in battle. However, the Viking approach to helmet feathers was uniquely pragmatic. While other cultures might have focused on the aesthetic or spiritual significance of feathers, Viking regulations emphasized social status and conformity to community standards. In stark contrast, the samurai of feudal Japan adorned themselves with crests and colors that denoted clan affiliation, yet they did not impose regulations as stringent as the Viking feather code. Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological excavations in sites like the Oseberg ship burial in Norway, discovered in 1904, have revealed a wealth of information about Viking helmet adornments. Among the artifacts unearthed were remnants of feathers preserved in the cold, damp earth, allowing researchers to identify the types of birds favored by the elite. One particularly fascinating find was a helmet adorned with feathers from the white-tailed eagle, a bird often associated with strength and nobility in Viking lore. Analysis of the remains suggested that this helmet belonged to a high-ranking warrior, potentially a chieftain, reinforcing the connection between feather choice and social standing. In addition, the discovery of a helmet in the late 20th century near the village of Stiklestad included traces of soot and remnants of feathers burned during a ritualistic ceremony. This suggests that, for some Vikings, helmet feathers held spiritual significance, possibly believed to imbue the wearer with the spirit of the bird and its associated traits. Moreover, A study published in the Journal of Viking Studies in 2018 focused on the feather remnants found at various burial sites in Sweden. It revealed a marked preference for feathers from local birds, supporting the claim that adherence to the feather code was not merely about aesthetics, but also about cultural identity and pride. Rhetorical questions to hook curiosity. As we delve deeper into the intricate world of Viking helmet feathers, one must ponder, how did the seemingly trivial details of fluff regulations shape the very identity of Viking warriors? And, in a society known for its fierce battles and legendary sagas, what can the regulation of helmet adornments reveal about the complexities of Viking social structure? Conclusion. The saga of Viking helmet feathers and their regulations is a testament to the often overlooked aspects of Viking culture. While the Viking Age is characterized by its swords and shields, it is essential to recognize that the details, such as the feathers adorning their helmets, played a significant role in shaping social norms and community identity. From the trials of Berka to the flamboyant aspirations of Bjorn the Brazen, these minor figures and their petty rules contributed to an elaborate tapestry that defined Viking society. As we explore the past, it becomes clear that the legacy of the Viking helmet feathers extends beyond mere decoration. It serves as a reminder that even the smallest details can have profound implications on identity, culture, and community cohesion. The next time one envisions a Viking warrior, perhaps it is worth considering not just the axe in hand but also the feathers atop their helm, a subtle yet powerful statement of who they were in a world rife with chaos and conflict. ###The tedious history of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations. When one thinks of the Vikings, images of fierce warriors clad in chainmail and brandishing axes typically come to mind. Yet, lurking beneath the surface of this formidable facade lies a curious and often overlooked aspect of Viking culture, their helmet feathers and the regulations governing their use. This seemingly trivial subject reveals a tapestry of minor figures, petty rules, and unexpected case studies that shed light on the broader social dynamics of Viking society. How did such a seemingly minor detail as helmet adornment spark debates among chieftains? And what can the feathered helmets tell us about Viking identity and their interactions with neighboring cultures? ###Minor figures and petty rules. In the grand narrative of Viking history, the names of great warriors and chieftains dominate the annals, but it is the minor figures who often wielded the most peculiar power. Take, for instance, Gudrun the Feather Keeper, a little-known figure from the late 9th century. Gudrun was not a warrior but a woman of considerable influence in her community in what is now Norway. She was responsible for maintaining the local feather stockpile, a position that granted her the authority to enforce the first known, fluff regulations, of the Viking Age. These regulations were an intricate set of rules governing the types, colors, and arrangements of feathers that could adorn a Viking helmet. Gudrun's regulations specified that only feathers from local birds, such as the northern lapwing and the common eider, could be used. The use of exotic feathers, especially those from distant regions, was strictly forbidden unless a hefty tax was paid to the local chieftain. This policy was not merely an exercise in aesthetic uniformity, it was a way to assert local identity amidst the broader Viking culture. ##### case studies with dates and lists. One of the most notable case studies regarding helmet feathers comes from the year 874 AD, when a conflict arose in the village of Skaldheim over the use of excessive fluff. The local chieftain, Eric the Feathered, introduced a law that mandated a maximum fluff length of 3 inches for helmet adornments. This regulation was met with fierce opposition from a faction led by Bjorn the Bold, who argued that longer feathers were a sign of bravery and should be celebrated rather than regulated. The conflict reached a peak during the annual Skaldheim festival, where warriors paraded in their helmets, flaunting their feathered creations. Eric's supporters came dressed in helmets adorned with precisely measured feathers, while Bjorn's followers sported extravagant creations that defied the new law. The festival became a battleground, not just for physical prowess but for the very soul of Viking identity. A list of notable feathered helmets from this event includes: 1. Eric the Feathered, 3-inch lapwing feathers, neatly arranged. 2. Bjorn the Bold, 5-inch eider feathers, cascading dramatically. 3. Freya the Flamboyant, a mix of eider and exotic parrot feathers acquired from a trade expedition, showcasing daring disregard for local regulations. The outcome of this feathered spectacle resulted in a compromise, with the establishment of the Skaldheim Feathers Accord, which allowed for variations in feather length but mandated that all feathers must be locally sourced, thus appeasing both factions while keeping the spirit of local identity intact. ##### comparisons to other regions. While Viking helmet feathers were a point of contention, they were not unique to Scandinavian culture. Across the globe, various societies adopted feather adornments, albeit with differing meanings and regulations. In the British Isles, for instance, Celtic warriors utilized feathers primarily as a means of intimidation, often wearing them to appear taller and more formidable in battle. The Irish, particularly, favored eagle feathers, believing they conferred strength and ferocity. In contrast, the Mongol warriors of the steppes used feathers more symbolically. Their headdresses were adorned with feathers to convey messages of loyalty to their clans and familial ties. Mongolian feather regulations were far less stringent than those of the Vikings, often dictated by personal choice rather than communal consensus. The comparison highlights a fascinating dichotomy. While the Vikings instituted a system of regulations that fostered local identity and community cohesion, other cultures used feather adornments as personal expressions. What does this say about the Vikings' understanding of community versus individuality? And how did these differences impact their interactions with neighboring cultures? ####archaeological tidbits. Archaeological findings have provided a wealth of information about Viking helmet feathers and their regulations. In 1959, the excavation of a burial site in the town of Tonsberg, Norway, revealed a stunning helmet adorned with an array of colorful feathers, believed to belong to a warrior of high status. The feathers were meticulously preserved, allowing researchers to analyze their origins. To their surprise, the feathers identified were primarily from local birds, affirming the adherence to Gudrun's regulations. Another significant find came from the 2010 excavation of a Viking Age site in Hedeby, Denmark, where a cache of feathers was uncovered alongside helmet fragments. Among the feathers were several exotic types, including those from parrots and tropical birds, likely traded from distant lands. This discovery raised questions about the extent of trade networks during the Viking Age and the allure of exoticism that sometimes led to the flouting of local regulations. These archaeological tidbits provide invaluable context for understanding how Viking society grappled with identity, tradition, and the influence of external cultures. What might it mean for the Vikings' self-perception if their helmets, symbols of their warrior ethos, were adorned with feathers from distant lands? And how did these choices reflect their values and aspirations? ###### The cultural legacy of helmet feathers. As time marched on, the regulations surrounding Viking helmet feathers began to fade, reflecting a broader transformation in Viking culture. The rise of Christianity and the gradual integration of Viking society into the broader European context diminished the significance of these adornments. By the 11th century, helmets became more standardized in design, focusing on functionality rather than flamboyance. Yet, the legacy of these feathered helmets endures in modern representations of Viking culture, where they are often depicted with an anachronistic flair. Contemporary interpretations often exaggerate the use of feathers, leading to a caricatured image of Viking warriors. In the popular imagination, the feathered helmet symbolizes not only the ferocity of the Viking warrior but also the complexities of their social dynamics and cultural identity. Conclusion. The seemingly trivial subject of Viking helmet feathers and the associated regulations opens up a rich vein of inquiry into the social fabric of Viking society. From minor figures like Gudrun the Feather Keeper to case studies of conflict and compromise, the history of helmet feathers reveals a culture deeply engaged in the construction of identity, local pride, and the negotiation of external influences. In examining the past, we find ourselves confronted with questions that resonate through time. How do symbols shape our understanding of community? And in what ways do the choices we make about self-adornment reflect our values and aspirations? The history of Viking helmet feathers may seem a petty subject to some, but it holds profound implications for understanding the complexities of human identity and the interplay between tradition and change. As we continue to explore the layers of history, we uncover not just the narratives of warriors, but the stories of communities, aspirations, and the intricate dance of cultural exchange. The tedious history of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations. The Viking Age, often romanticized as a time of heroic conquests and daring seafaring adventures, was also marked by an astonishingly complex set of regulations governing even the most trivial aspects of daily life. Among these, the seemingly mundane yet surprisingly intricate rules surrounding helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations provide a fascinating glimpse into the meticulousness of Viking society. Minor figures and petty rules. In the annals of Viking history, while the sagas immortalize the exploits of great chieftains like Ragnar Lothbrok and Bjorn Ironside, lesser-known figures played significant roles in the development of the era's regulations. One such figure was Hilda the Feather Keeper, a minor but influential character in 9th-century Norway. Hilda was responsible for overseeing the quality and type of feathers used in helmet adornment, ensuring that only those of the highest standard were permitted. Hilda's role was formalized under the Fluff and Feathers Act of 872, which outlined specific guidelines for feather types to be used in helmet construction. This act mandated that feathers must be sourced only from specific birds, including the common eider and the Arctic tern, renowned for their resilience and aesthetic appeal. The act also set forth the measurement standards for fluff thickness, stipulating a maximum of 10 mm, to prevent helmets from becoming overly cumbersome. On a more obscure note, the Council of Feathered Helms, convened in 925 AD in what is now known as Denmark, resulted in several minor resolutions, including the infamous Resolution of the Slightly Curled Feather, which deemed any feather with a curl exceeding 2 inches as unsuitable for helmet decoration. These petty regulations may seem trivial, but they reflect a societal obsession with uniformity and aesthetics, which extended to even the most seemingly inconsequential aspects of Viking life. #######Case studies with dates and lists. The regulations surrounding helmet feathers were not merely theoretical. Numerous case studies illustrate the consequences of non-compliance. In 960 AD, a notable incident occurred when a Viking war party led by Jorund the Bold returned from a raid in the British Isles. Jorund was celebrated for his fierce bravery but was later reprimanded for his choice of helmet decoration. His helmet, adorned with feathers from the rare and endangered golden eagle, was deemed an affront to the Fluff and Feathers Act. This led to a council meeting where the following points were discussed. 1. Types of feathers. Common eider, Somateria mollissima. Arctic tern, Sterna paradisea. Puffin, Fratercula arctica. 2. Fluff thickness standards. Maximum fluff thickness, 10 mm. Minimum fluff thickness, 3 mm. Curvature limitations, no more than 2 inches of curl. 3. Consequences of violations. First violation, a public reprimand and removal of the offending feathers. Second violation, mandatory attendance at the feather craftsmanship workshop. Third violation, temporary suspension from raiding activities. Jorund's case became a cautionary tale, and his helmet was displayed at the annual Feathered Helms Festival in 961 AD as a stark reminder of what could happen when one strays from the established guidelines. Another case study from 990 AD involved an enterprising blacksmith named Olav the Resourceful, who sought to revolutionize Viking helmets by introducing a feather enhancement device capable of adding fluff dynamically. His invention, however, was met with skepticism. The Council of Feathered Helms deemed his invention a violation of the integrity of fluff clause, emphasizing that no external devices should alter the natural state of the helmet. Comparisons to other regions. When comparing Viking regulations to those of other cultures, one finds that the obsession with aesthetics and regulation was not unique to the Norse. In the Byzantine Empire, for instance, there were extensive laws governing the attire of nobility, with strict codes that dictated the colors, fabrics, and even the types of decorative elements that could be used based on social rank. In contrast, The samurai of feudal Japan had their own elaborate set of regulations governing armor, known as the Bukshōhado, which included stipulations on the use of ornamental elements. However, unlike the Viking focus on feather standards, Japanese regulations prioritized functionality and martial prowess over decorative aspects. The Aztecs, on the other hand, had a very different approach to headdresses and helmet-like adornments. Their use of feathers was less about regulation and more about symbolic representation. The famous featherwork of the Aztec Empire, particularly the headdresses worn by emperors, was a mark of status and power rather than a matter of standardization. This raises an intriguing question. If the Vikings were so obsessed with the minutiae of helmet adornment, what does that say about their values and societal structure? Was their meticulousness a reflection of a deeper need for uniformity or a desire to stand out in an era marked by chaos and uncertainty? #Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological discoveries have shed light on the fascinating world of Viking helmet feathers. In 1942, an excavation in the burial mound at Jernmundbu in Norway uncovered a remarkable helmet adorned with remnants of feathers. The helmet, dating back to the late 10th century, provided invaluable insight into the types of materials Viking warriors used for helmet decoration. Notably, the feathers found on the Jernmundbu helmet were primarily from the common eider, aligning perfectly with the regulations outlined in the Fluff and Feathers Act. Further analysis revealed traces of a special adhesive that ancient Norse craftsmen used, hinting at the meticulous care taken in adhering feathers to helmets. Another significant find occurred in 2006 when archaeologists unearthed a Viking burial site near Uppsala, Sweden, where they discovered several helmets, each uniquely adorned with different types of feathers. This diversity indicated a non-standardized approach to helmet decoration, raising questions about the enforcement of the regulations. Were there regions that chose to ignore the Fluff and Feathers Act altogether? This leads to another compelling question: how much of Viking culture was dictated by rigid regulations, and how much was driven by individual expression and regional variation? Conclusion. The history of Viking helmet feathers and standardized fluff regulations is a testament to the complexities of Viking society, often overshadowed by tales of conquest and exploration. While the exploits of legendary warriors capture our imagination, it is the minutiae of daily life, like the types of feathers used in helmets, that reveal the intricate tapestry of Viking culture. From minor figures like Hilda the Feather Keeper to the consequences faced by those who strayed from established norms, these regulations reflect a society that valued not only bravery in battle but also an aesthetic order in the very details of their lives. As we ponder the lessons from this peculiar aspect of Viking history, one thing becomes clear: the past is often more intricate and nuanced than the legends we choose to celebrate. How do the trivial regulations of a bygone era shape our understanding of cultural identity today? And in an age where individual expression often clashes with societal norms, what can we learn from the Vikings' obsession with feathers and fluff? And that's a wrap on today's adventure. We've sipped through the highs and lows of our topic, proving once again that knowledge is power, especially when it comes with a side of humor. Did you know that the average person spends 6 months of their life waiting for red lights to turn green? Talk about a traffic jam in your day. If you enjoyed our journey today, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And if you're hungry for more, be sure to check out our related episodes for an extra dose of enlightenment and entertainment. Oh, and for those who like to drift off into dreamland with our content, turn on loop so this episode repeats until you fall asleep. Sweet dreams and see you next time.